Well, he's not the biggest star to play running back at Kansas State, but Joe Hall was certainly the biggest dude to play running back at Kansas State. When he showed up on campus in 1999, he weighed 300 pounds, and that did not stop him from having an outstanding junior season. But what makes Joe Hall so remarkable is what he's done after college and his new job as the Director of Player Development for Chris Kleiman's new program. Here's the Power Chat with Joe Hall. Welcome to another edition of the Power Chat. Today I'm joined by Joe Hall, new Director of Student Athlete Development. Did I get that right?
Yes, sir.
That's a cool title.
It is.
That's, you can talk about coordinators and head coaches, but that title carries a lot of responsibility. You deal hands-on with these players, right?
Yes. Mainly building the relationships. I like to explain it as school counseling on a collegiate level. So building the relationships, dealing with the guys in their classes, everything from their residents, everything that you can think of that the coaches just don't have the time to do. It's kind of dropped in my lap. Really exciting in terms of being that bridge between the coaches and the players. So,
in case people don't know, you played at K-State in 99 and 2001. You redshirted in between. So you came on the heels of the great 98 team. You're being recruited during that time. And we'll get into some of that. But I want to go back and talk about a few things. First, I want to start with this, kind of pause in the middle. I remember the first time you came to a press conference in the old Big 8 room at Veneer. And we heard about this guy that was a running back and almost 300 pounds. And we're thinking you're going to be, round, like a, kind of deep stack. You sat down and you had no belly. Have you ever had your body mass measured? I mean, I joke about being big boned. I think you're literally big boned because you did not look anywhere close to 300 on that day.
I haven't, but
Don't do it now.
Yeah, I've been, all of my life, people have always said that I weighed more than I looked like. I mean, I'm over 350 pounds now. Probably closer to looking like that than ever. But I played, my playing time was over 300 pounds the entire time that I was here. Usually when I gain weight, it's, upper body, which is just a family thing. So that's where you get most of your mass or your weight from. But yeah, I mean, it's been something that has been said since I was a young guy.
Everyone thought you were a gimmick when you were recruited. And then you played and oh, he's not a gimmick at all. This guy can really play. Do you have any clue what your 40 time was? Because when you got in the open field, you ran.
I ran a 4.63 at the combine. I was actually pretty light considering at the time. I was about 277.
A wisp.
Yes, that was a feather right there. And in high school, hand time, I was a 4.49, 4.51s, and things like that.
That's crazy, man.
So running was just one of those things that I woke up and could do. Obviously, for my size, I was always one of the faster guys. I don't know where it came from. My dad was a runner and still runs today, but in terms of the speed and just, I have no idea where it popped up.
Well, you were fun to watch, really fun to watch. I would say that in K-State football history, in terms of guys who didn't gain 1,000 yards in their career, you're the most beloved. People still talk about Joe Hall because let's be honest, you didn't get the ball enough.
Yeah.
I'll just say it. Let's go back further. Growing up in Compton, impossible for a guy like me that grew up on the hard streets of Salina, Kansas, to quite grasp. But what was your youth like?
I lucked up. Compton was a tough place to be at the time. It was probably one of the worst places in terms of violence, especially with gang violence and drug, use and abuse. I lucked up in terms of having mom and dad in the household. A dad that was good with the streets,
involved,
not necessarily from a bad perspective, but was a guy that was respected, coached, and did those kind of things. So I had a good idea of what happened and took place outside of the house, and they understood that as well. He coached for 20 years prior to me being even thought of. And had a lot of young men that were involved in the same things that made Compton what it was in terms of the struggles. So I always told people I had a pretty good life, relatively, in terms of what some of my friends went through with having, struggling mothers, single mothers, absent fathers, dealing with the gang stuff and the drug. I really didn't have the same type of experiences with those things. So relatively, it was significantly better for me than it was for a lot of the people that I was dealing with. Two-parent
household, but I sense that you understood what's true for any young person, but probably greatly magnified in a place like Compton. The friends that you choose, you probably chose wisely.
Yeah.
And it probably guided you out. You ended up in junior college. So I take it, were you in junior college because of academics or because nobody recruited you?
It was more academic. I only had one school that I wanted to go to, which was University of Southern California. I grew up with USC on the mind. And I didn't really have any desire to play anywhere or go to school anywhere else. A lot of the schools that recruited me in high school were looking to switch positions and things of that nature, including USC. My grade point average was low enough to where I had to have a higher SAT score. Right. So I ended up taking the SAT. They changed the ruling. They changed the rule in terms of acceptance into universities. So I ended up having to get a higher score, and it was after the date.
Right.
So the fact that I played football, basketball, and baseball, and getting drafted to play baseball, I flirted with the idea of playing baseball professionally, and kind of waited to the last minute to take my final SAT chance, and then didn't get the score that I needed. So, it was an academic thing. It wasn't ever a situation where I was below expectation or anything. I always could have done I could have done better. I was capable of doing a lot better. So I always use the idea of not doing what I should have done academically to even have it a close, even have to worry about being able to get into a school. So yeah, a lot of it was academic. A lot of it was just timing, and whatever was left over was just the idea of me having to go to UCLA over USC, which was not the plan. So
Pasadena's not bad.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all.
But hold on, you played baseball. What position?
I was a first baseman.
I was going to say, I hope you weren't a shortstop.
Well, I was an outfielder for the longest.
You can move.
Once I started getting looked at from professional teams, the idea was just to let them hit the ball and concentrate on catching the ball over at first and not having to stress yourself out by being an outfielder. Yeah. So that was kind of the thing that I did. I got drafted by the Detroit Tigers and did a little bit that summer with their rookie team, and that was kind of the transition, was going from being this defensive guy to the big guy position where they just stand you over there and look good and catch the ball.
So what positions do people want to move you to?
Mainly just defensive.
Yeah. D tackle?
Yeah. I don't know what they saw other than size. Obviously, I know what they saw. I didn't do anything defensively that would make you think that I would be a standout defensive guy. I always played running back, from my freshman year through, all the way through junior college. And defense was one of the things that I did well, but it wasn't something that if you watched me on film, you would see flashes of this guy, and then he just took off the last 10 plays and then got a sack. And, so, I understand what they saw, but I never wanted to play defense. So when those things came up, a lot of schools flirted with the idea of me playing tight end, being an H-back type thing before it was really that position where they did both H-back, fullback, and tight end type things. But mainly it was just the idea of playing fullback, which was, as a lead blocker, not something that I wanted to do.
No, you were running back.
Yeah, so most of them,
I always said I thought you would be an NFL D tackle if that had been the position you invested in, just because that size, speed, and quickness is just a rarity. It's amazing. So you go to Palomar. What was life like at Palomar for you?
It was great, man. I had a ball. I was young, so I graduated at 17 from high school. So it was the first time that I was away from family, even though it was 2 hours up the road, a 2-hour drive. It was the first time that mom and dad weren't telling me when to go to sleep and do all of the, so I had a ball. We moved into this house with one of my best friends that I grew up with. He went down with me. I actually went with him. And we stayed in like this 5-bedroom house, and it was kind of like the real world, like the show, The Real World. And it was great, living in San Diego area and just having a ball,
that doesn't look at all.
Just having a ball. And we took care of our business in terms of academics and stuff like that. Football was always, one of the things that we handled pretty well. But just the idea of being almost borderline adult type thing was great. I had a ball.
So you're going through your second year at junior college in '98, correct? When K-State is at the top of college football. Everyone's talking about that '98 K-State team. But I assume you still wanted USC to come knocking. Yeah. Did they?
They did. My two final schools were USC and Kansas State. And by that time, I had some more experience with other coaches, and the guys that were actually at USC when I decided that USC was where I wanted to be were at UNLV at the time, and it was John Robinson, the old Rams coach, and loved that guy growing up. And so I started considering other schools. USC was one that was still talking the fullback thing, the lead blocking thing. So it was a chance. I started understanding that it would be a chance that I ended up somewhere else. So.
Kansas State comes knocking, and Bill Snyder had coached under Coach Robinson briefly.
Yeah.
And was there anything that kind of reminded you of Coach Robinson and Coach Snyder?
I can't say then, because I didn't know John Robinson that well, like
you
on a personal level.
Saw him from afar.
Yeah, so it was the appreciation of him as the Rams coach, which was always a Rams and Raiders kind of guy, Rams and Raiders town. So just the idea of thinking, man, you could play with a coach that coached in the NFL, and that was more the connection there. When Coach Snyder first came onto the scene, as far as I was concerned, I really didn't have any idea what he was about, so it was literally Kansas State being delivered to me, and from zero, and let's see how far it could get kind of thing. And they did a very good job of doing so.
They did a marvelous job back then of recruiting junior colleges. They, that 97-98 junior college recruiting class really changed college football, because it proved that you could succeed at the highest levels with junior college players, and before that it was kind of taboo. You probably ran into that some on the recruiting trail. We don't do this. At what point did you start to focus in on K-State and begin to come to terms with the fact that I might be going to the middle of Kansas to play my college football?
So I spoke to Ron Hudson, who was the offensive coordinator at the time, and he was my area scout. And the very first time we spoke, he said, well, let me say what I said first. I said, Kansas State, that's the team that has the black quarterback. And, and I knew Michael Bishop from that. I couldn't think of his name at the time, but I remember that comment very well. They have the black quarterback. That's, that's cool. Okay. And knew KU from basketball, and having guys like Paul Pierce and Jock Vaughn and guys that were from California. So always attributed Kansas to Kansas Jayhawks. But I did know of Michael Bishop.
Yeah.
So when I mentioned that, Coach Hudson said, he laughed, was on the phone, and he laughed and he said, yeah, we have some other guys too. And I thought that was kind of cool. And just like KU was in basketball, Nebraska, Colorado, Texas,
right.
Big 12 guys, those teams were heavily represented by guys from California. So when he mentioned Nebraska, who was at the top of the heap at the time, he said, I think we have the team that can beat Nebraska this year. And when I heard that, I was like, this is the most ridiculous thing that I've ever heard in my life. Kansas State is not going to beat Nebraska. I don't even know who else is on Kansas State's team. Like, seriously, it's just, but it stuck with me enough that I was going to pay attention to that game. Shortly, and this was prior to any games being played that season. Shortly thereafter, Kansas State went on a run, and obviously, beating up, I think it was Indiana State earlier. And it was just like, man, they could have scored 100 points, and started paying attention a little closer, and the number, the ranking started popping up a little closer, and I was just like, man, so that's where it generated, was just the idea of Kansas State actually, as far as we were concerned, popping on the national scene. And what I mean by national scene wasn't the fact that they were ranked, but people were actually talking about them.
They were fun, dynamic team.
And then guys were, magazines were saying, can they beat Nebraska? And I thought that was like cool. Man, this coach gave me kind of like the inside, scoop on this. And, I was a young kid and hadn't been on that level at all in terms of media presence or anything. So it was just great that when that came about, and that game came, and K-State was undefeated, Nebraska was, I believe, undefeated at the time too. It was just one of those things where it was like, man, this is exactly what he said was going to do. When they won the game, it was pretty much a slam dunk that Kansas State was going to be in my top schools of choice. I was still pretty fearful of going away to school, and I don't think it was a fear of like culture shock or anything like that, or weather or anything more than it was just the idea of switching from a California kid, the idea of not going to a California school. Even that high school experience where I was saying I was sure that I was USC or not, I had considered UCLA pretty heavily, which was probably the worst thing that I could do in my mind at the time. But going out of California was not one of the things that I was looking forward to doing. So they did exactly what they needed to do in terms of convincing me and kind of just putting themselves at the top of the list in terms of my recruiting process.
You sign, you show up. Any culture shock?
Initially, I didn't see too much of anything other than the way that things look. You're so entrenched in football.
Right.
I still had classwork that I needed to do. So I was in the facility. I had, paid for a tutor. My parents had to pay for the tutor. So I was locked into those things. So I was in love with the facility, which is crazy. It was like a tenth of what it is, now. But I was like, man, this is cool. They have computers in here. Everybody's working for you. Like whatever you can talk, you can go downstairs and lift weights. Like, man, this is the best thing ever. So I was in love with the idea of Kansas State football. I didn't really get into the community. Most of the interactions that I had with people in the community were all great because everyone was excited about, the 98 team and then what we were adding to this team. And obviously with the L. Roberson coming in and replacing Michael Bishop or Jonathan Beasley taking that, it was just, it was a great time. So a lot of the culture things I didn't get to until later on. But just from the look of things, it was, I walked to the facility and it smelled the cows and the sheep, and that was huge and different. And I was like, man, I got to tell my buddies that I go to a school and play at the stadium, and there's like animals across the road. And a lot of the animals I saw were animals that you just didn't see.
Of course.
So I see squirrels now, and it's like common, it's like a fly, a house fly. And at the time it was like, man, a squirrel, like, that's a rabbit. That's, and we don't see those, too many cars running around. Yeah. So it was just, I mean, those from a highlighted point and a light side, those were kind of culture things that, and environmental things that I was like, man, I'm not in California. This is totally different. One of the things that I also remember was the men that you would meet. I would meet people in the grocery store, and they would always, touch you and shake your hand, and that was different. So that was one of the things, probably from a negative standpoint for me, that made me uncomfortable. That was different than I was used to, because I tell people in LA, you just don't. You don't contact. Yeah. That can go a million different ways, and it's not usually a positive thing. So that was kind of different for me, but it was, all in from a positive thing at that time. I was just like, this is exactly where I need to be. I need to see these things. This is different than I've, and I feel comfortable and safe. So that was always a positive.
Young Joe Hall comes to Manhattan, Kansas, still not bought into the academic thing, which you have now, obviously. Yes. We'll get into that. But you had a lot of lessons to learn. You made some mistakes. You had a couple of arrests early on. Yeah. One was a minor in possession, I think. Half the student bodies had that. The other was a gun charge. My favorite Ron Hudson quote. Ron and I were pretty close, and I would sit in his office back in the day when reporters were allowed to wander the halls, and we'd talk, and he told me the greatest quote about you, that you told him, Coach, the gun was unloaded, and where I'm from, that's the right thing. Yeah. And that just struck me. I'm like, that is, as a white guy from Kansas, I don't think about these things, but but you still learned the lesson that that's not the right thing here, and you didn't really need it here.
Absolutely.
That had to be a shock to the system to think, well, I don't really need to be carrying this around here.
Yeah, I mean, and this will probably be the first time that I had to tell the story, from the true perspective and the way that it happened. I had actually gotten, it was my firearm. I'd actually gotten it from my roommate at the time, who had taken it down, who was, we'll leave that what it is. He was doing, and the comment that I made to Coach Hudson was that when I retrieved the firearm, that I unloaded it, and I stuck around for a little longer than I should have. He asked me, why didn't you just get home? And that was the kind of, well, it's unloaded, like, that's not a big deal. And it really,
paperweight at that point.
Yeah, it really didn't cross my mind of concealed weapon. It didn't even cross my mind. I knew even then that I shouldn't be obviously in the bar or around other people with a firearm. There was no need for it, but it didn't even cross my mind that was one of the, I didn't think anyone would ever think that I was out to protect myself or do anything of that nature. So that was one of the toughest ideas, was just the perception of it more than anything else. Once that happened, and then you link everything else and lump everything else together, then it kind of developed this personality or this character that I wasn't necessarily pushing for, but that was kind of the head of it all, and when you mess up on the field, well, that was the guy that was carrying the gun, he's from Compton, then you put all of these things together that weren't necessarily, they shouldn't have been career killers. But as an adult, I see it differently. I take full responsibility for it, because there was a million different things that I could have done differently to avoid that situation. But I mean, that was part of it.
If I recall, I don't think I read a single news story that said unloaded handgun. It just said handgun. Yeah. And so, okay. Play your junior year. Let's talk football. 613 yards, 6 TDs, had 300-yard plus games, and there's some pretty good running backs in the program. I think David Allen, Frank Murphy. There's some dudes that could play, but you really broke out that year. How good did that feel when you just start racking up the 100-yard games?
It was great, man. That was one of the, being a young guy and thinking, as a young kid, youth sports, that this is what I wanted to do, that I wanted to go to college. And it wasn't ever about an NFL thing. It wasn't ever about Major League Baseball. It wasn't ever about the NBA. It was always college. I love the college game. To get into a junior college and being a top guy and then thinking, holy crap, is my talent going to transfer to the next level and it be seen? When I showed up on campus, and I still tell people today, Frank Murphy was the fastest human being that I had ever seen run in shirts and shorts. And listening to his times, listening to his heights, the lifting thing, it was just like, oh my goodness, I'm never gonna play here, And this was before putting a helmet on, like this. What can I do to get here? Then they have this guy, David Allen, who people know about, and it was like, this is amazing. He's running back a kick, punt every time they kick it to him, like obviously another fast guy, much faster than I was, obviously smaller, but and it was just those kind of things where you're thinking, where do I fit into this? These are guys that are already popular, already known, hardworking guys. So when I did get my opportunity to carry the ball and do well with it as the season went on, it was a big weight off my back in terms of I can do it on this level, and I don't know that I ever thought that it wouldn't go well, but that was always my fear. It was, what if you go there and, some of these things happen, with injuries instead of the charges. What if something happens with, an academic situation from way back that, would halt that opportunity? And it didn't really matter to me. The only thing that mattered to me was that I didn't want to go home as somebody that didn't do well in football and didn't do what I was supposed to do. So that was always the fear, when I wasn't in the best shape of my life, that was just kind of one of the things. It was so natural for me to do these things that I had to learn what like hard work was. I had to learn what like pushing yourself past the limit was. I don't think that I've ever ran a sprint and not made the time in terms of one at a time, but I had to get to my maturity stage where it allowed me to do as well as I could instead of just coasting through. So that was the academic issues too, was, okay, I need a 2.0. Okay, I'll give you a 2.0. And then you fail a test or you don't do as well on a test and it drops to a 1.9. And now you're scrambling to be ineligible instead of just getting the 3.8, 4.0 that you were probably capable of doing. That was my entire life at the time, was just, as they say, maximizing the minimum, and so I mean, I did a lot of those things. If you were 250 pounds, you would be this fast. Well, I'm 300 and I'm this fast. That's pretty cool. Like it was never a challenge of let's be as great as we could be. So that was kind of the fear. There was just the idea of I'm not in the greatest shape that I could be in. I have all of these other things going on, but the one thing that I could always hold my hat on was that I could play football. And, that kind of fixed all of the issues with the culture changes and the issues that I was having in ideology and with the coaches or whatever the case was. Once I got the ball handed to me, then I felt like everybody would understand, what I was about.
So you redshirted in 2000. What was it, grades?
Yes, well, the combination of everything. Yeah.
You were in Coach Snyder's dog.
Yes,
which is not a fun place to be.
Absolutely not. And it was a long time coming. Me and Coach Snyder had several conversations, and I've probably spoken to Coach Snyder 10 times in my life, and 9 of them were out of correction of things that I was doing wrong.
Get your together.
Yeah. So I tell people all the time that I had a different relationship. I saw him from a different angle than a lot of people were able to because of those situations. But yeah, it came down to it. He told me that I wasn't going to be on the team. He didn't want me around the facility. But I wasn't going to be on scholarship. He would allow me to work myself back into it. But I wasn't going to be able to work out with the team, practice with the team, and all of those things. So that was probably one of the rude awakenings, or those awakening moments where you realize For the first time, this is not, you're not playing football. You're not going to be the one that people are cheering for, or even want to see out there. Like you don't really even exist. I went to one of the games that year, and I stood right in front of the locker room. Obviously, before it was beautiful as it is today, and I stood right in front of the locker room and watched the game, and realized that they were cheering for guys that my brothers, my guys. But had no idea that I was even in the stadium, and I don't think anyone really cared. And that was one of the things that hit home, was that it'll go on without you. So either figure it out or chalk it up.
And you did.
I did.
But you didn't play a ton in 2001. You didn't get the same kind of carries, and it wasn't a great season for K-State. It was kind of a shock to the system, going 6-6 overall. And as we kind of wrap up this first half of this interview, that you go to the NFL. You just kind of knocked around, didn't you? You never quite found your space. Who all were you with during your NFL times?
I signed as a free agent with the St. Louis Rams right after my senior year. Was with the Chiefs for a couple years, and then finished in Oakland in 2006. A lot of that was more of the carryover of not understanding what hard work was. I think in the NFL, they took more offense to the fact that you have this talent, you have these abilities, you have these natural gifts, and you're squandering them for lack of a better word. You're just not maximizing those talents. Unfortunately, I always went to a position or a team where they had the position that they needed, and I was going to have to do something pretty amazing to have even an opportunity to be on the practice squad, just because the fullback position at the time, the big halfback was not necessarily the thing for everybody. So it was just a difficult thing you had to be perfect with it, and I just wasn't willing to do those things. Wasn't able, hadn't been asked to do those things in the past. So although I took these great bounds personally, in terms of my work ethic and things like that, it just wasn't enough of what they were accounting for. I remember Dick Vermeil told me, word out of his mouth, that he would take a kid that was half my talent, that busted his butt, than to give me the luxury of just flopping around and getting away with things because I was so talented. And he said that in tears, as Dick Vermeil does a lot. And it wasn't to attack me. It was just a slap in the face. Yeah. And it was one of the things that was probably one of the most powerful things that I had ever heard, because that's really what it was all about. Was you have these gifts, and I'm not gonna reward you for not getting the most of them. So,
well, you kind of tripped through life getting by, and you're in your early 20s. But you did figure it out. We're going to shift gears after the break and start talking about the Joe Hall that became this Joe Hall, a remarkable man that has really changed his life and embraced education. It's amazing the things you've done academically since then. Well, we will be right back with the second part of the Power Chat with Joe Hall.